About 6 months ago, we commissioned a local pet portrait artist to draw a picture of Dylan for us. Dylan is pretty old now, he's 15, which is quite old for a cat. We know that he's not going to be around forever, and this was something that we can keep forever so that he's always with us. This drawing is by KTS Pet Drawings. I've linked her on Instagram in the description box below if you're interested in checking out her work and perhaps even getting your own commission. We wrapped it up in cardboard to protect it while we moved home, and it's been sitting there ever since, and I finally found the time to make a frame for it. I wanted a frame that looked quite fancy, and originally I was looking at buying a gold gilded style frame, but they're pretty expensive, so I decided to make one instead. After looking through all of the wood that I have stored, I decided to use this oak architrave. I had 2 pieces which, believe it or not, I found and pulled out from a skip. I don't know why people throw stuff like this away, but sometimes I'm quite glad that they do. First I need to cut the mitre joints, and I started by cutting a 45-degree angle onto the end of each piece. Later I'm going to be routing out a rebate into the frame to accommodate the glass and the drawing, and my router bit cuts a 9mm rebate, and I need to account for that 9mm in order to make the frame the correct size. So here I'm marking that up on the inside of the frame. Then I make a mark where that rebate will start, and I line up 100mm on my tape measure with that line, and I'm doing that just because it's easier and more accurate than lining it up with 0 on the tape measure. I can then mark up the length I need, adding 100mm to account for the start position of the tape measure, and make another mark, and I also mark a line to indicate the direction of the mitre that I need to cut, just so that I don't get confused and cut it the wrong way. I can then line up my blade with that mark and position a stop block butted up to the end of the workpiece to allow me to cut 2 consistent lengths. I added a wedge of wood underneath the workpiece to help support it so that the back was square to the fence, and then I make the cuts to cut the 2 long edges of the frame. I then cut another mitre angle onto the piece I had left and followed the same process to cut the short pieces of the frame to length. I can then do a dry fit to make sure that all of my mitres meet up accurately, and I spent a lot of time getting my mitre saw set up as accurately as possible when I built my mitre station, so they met together about as well as I could have hoped for. To glue up the joints, I'm going to use the masking tape hinge method so I can add the glue and fold the joints together. I add a bit more tape to hold things in place. And then I can check for square with my framing square. This shouldn't really need clamps, but I added a few anyway. Firstly, to keep the back in contact with the flat surface of my workbench, and secondly, just to add a bit of light pressure to the joints. Probably just a personal thing, but I much prefer using light clamping pressure with parallel clamps over using band clamps or ratchet straps. I have both, but I very rarely use them. With the glue dry, next I wanted to reinforce the joints because glued mitered end grain joints aren't particularly strong, and this frame is going to be quite heavy as it's solid oak. I could have cut some dominoes to join the mitres together or cut some splines, but I wanted to try something different on this one. First I marked up a square onto the back of the frame over the mitre joints, and then I routed out a recess using a straight cutter. I could have made a template for this to get them all fitting perfectly, but instead I just did it by eye, staying inside the lines. These don't have to be perfect because they're going to be on the back of the frame. I then mark up the size onto some of this 6mm plywood and cut out the pieces at the bandsaw, and then I can square up the corners and clean up the cuts up to the line using a chisel. I can then apply glue and use an F-clamp to push the squares in place, and after the glue had set I sanded them flush. Next was the bit I wasn't looking forward to, which was removing the old finish and dirt from this awkwardly shaped profile. You can see here the dirt stuck inside the grain of the wood, so lots of scraping was needed. I used my card scraper to take fine shavings and clean up the wood, and for the harder to reach areas and corners I used my carbide scraper. I have a link in the description box where you can find most of the tools that I use regularly if you're interested in checking them out. I then sanded the wood at 100 grit by hand and also using my random orbit sander until the wood looked much better. With that done, I fitted my rebate bit into the router, and this has a bearing on it which helps guide the cutter to cut an accurate 9mm wide rebate. I got a bit of burning here initially, and that's because oak is a very hard wood, but also because I had the speed set slightly too high on my router, so you'll see here there's less burning once I realised that and slowed down the cutter. I then needed to square up the corners with a chisel. The back edges of the frame had some torn out grain, so to clean that up I decided to cut a round over on them, again using the router. And once that was done, I figured that the front edges should match, so I added the round over there too. After a bit of hand sanding, I added my maker's mark to the back of the frame, and I'm using a different blowtorch than the one I normally use, which seems to heat up the iron much quicker. And as you can see, it came out a little bit too scorched, so I did a bit of sanding to even it out a little. For finish, I used hard wax oil. I've been using this a lot lately, mainly because I've been doing a few kitchen worktop restoration projects lately as commissions for clients, and I have about half a tin left to make use of. It's a really nice finish, but it's a little bit on the pricey side. But a little goes a long way, so I find that a tin does last quite a long while. I just paid a visit to my local glass cutting company and I bought this for the frame. This was £7.62 cut to size. It always surprises me just how cheap glass is to buy. The equivalent size piece of Perspex, ordering it online, would have cost me about £20, so this is a bit of a bargain really. And now I just need to check that it fits. Did I take my measurements correctly? Yep, slots right in. Great. I've been looking through my sheet materials to try and find a backing, and I've actually found this from an old picture frame which already has these screw hooks attached, which are going to be useful. It's slightly longer than it needs to be and it's about the right width, but I think I'm just going to leave it as is and secure it with staples along the top and the bottom. And that's because I don't want to cut my rebate any deeper to accommodate the back panel, because on the front side of the frame that piece is already quite thin. That does mean the frame's going to be spaced off the wall by an additional 3mm or however thick this backing piece is, and this definitely isn't how the professionals would do a framing job, but it's going to work for me and it's going to protect the back of the artwork, and that's all that really matters to me. So it's just occurred to me that the weight of the frame and the glass is all going to be pulling on just these staples. So I've added some gaffer tape to the sides, and I think I'm going to add a couple of screws at the top and the bottom just to make sure that this all stays together as it should. All that was left to do was to hang up the frame, but first I needed to ask the boss where to position it.
Further down.
Don't we want him looking down on us?
Well,
like he does in real life?
Put it central.
Where's central, right?
Well, no, I mean put it central in as if the wall is framing it, and then we'll move it from there. So put it in the middle of that wall. Yeah. Right, okay. A little bit to the right. Move it up. Again. Again. A little bit down. I don't want to come back out. Yeah.
Like that?
Uh-huh.
Thanks.
It's you. Look.
That's it for this one. I'm really pleased with how the frame turned out, and I think it took about 6 or 7 hours in total. The wood turned out really nice considering it was pretty dirty when I found it. It was definitely a lucky find. I hope you enjoyed the project. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already for more weekly woodworking videos. You can also support the channel on Patreon if you want to, where you can get early access to my videos, some exclusive content, free project plans and cut lists, and a name credit at the end of my videos. Thank you for watching.